Welcome to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money and investing. I'm your host, Ray Treverson from OTG Capital. This show is proudly sponsored by OTG Capital. We are a wholesale investment trust dealing in private credit, private debt around Australia, and that is the paid piece. I'm requested to do that by the broadcasters associations, etc. We broadcast locally on Radio Northern Beaches and around Australia on the Community Radio Network to over 15 stations now across the country, compliments of the Community Broadcasting Association of Australia. I'm really pleased to welcome back to the microphone and camera Justin Bott, who's the Media Information Officer from Services Australia. Great organisation, ladies and gentlemen. You know why they're great? Because they deal with government money and they pay money out to people. We love that. We love that, and we love having Justin on the show because he keeps telling us about all this good stuff that people are not always aware of. And again, you'd be surprised, Justin, when we did the show on Medicare and unclaimed benefits, and I was telling people, wow, there's over $250 million out there unclaimed. People are going, that can't be right. And I'm going, oh, yes, it definitely is. Now,
do you know what's bigger?
What's that?
Unclaimed super.
Oh,
it's somewhere in the vicinity of $21 billion in unclaimed super.
21 billion.
22 billion dollars in unclaimed super. So yes, while you're listening, completely on the side, but while you're listening, just have a quick dash over to the ATO by your MyGov account and click over the ATO, search for lost super. And if some of it's yours, then there's 21 billion to be spread amongst the country.
Wow, that's a lot of cash. That is a lot of cash. Okay, so today we are going to talk about granny flats. Now, granny flats is one of those interesting subjects because when you live in Sydney, ladies and gentlemen, everybody loves talking about real estate. And I was recently in Canberra visiting some clients, and I've got family there as well. And funnily enough, real estate's very much a hot topic there as well, as it is in a lot of capital cities. And given the Brisbane Gold Coast area now with the Olympics coming up in 2032 or wherever, real estate is a hot topic. Now, granny flats are becoming increasingly popular, but ... Justin, you're on the show today to explain what granny flats do and don't do to people that are on Centrelink payments. So what's the first thing? So when I think about granny flats, I think about somebody that's built a self-contained flat in a backyard. Okay, so that might be the case, but what's Services Australia's view of what a granny flat means or a granny flat arrangement?
Yeah, so it is bigger than that. There definitely could be a granny flat arrangement, but it's not just that idea of a self-contained unit. So the premise behind it is that I'm going to transfer an asset of size to you, whether that be cash, whatever it might be, and in return, you're going to give me somewhere to live for the rest of my life. So it's this trade-off. It's one of the reasons why it's not treated as a gift, because I'm actually getting something in return. I give you this cash, you give me somewhere to live for the rest of my life. And it can...
So it could be a bedroom then?
Yes, absolutely. There's all sorts of things. As long as you promise, it could be that one of the classics is obviously I pay for the construction of that self-contained unit in your backyard.
Right.
But the self-contained unit isn't in my name. The backyard's obviously in your name. So I don't have any legal entitlement to it, but you're giving me somewhere to live for the rest of my life. I can also transfer the complete title of my home to you and then keep living in my home. I don't own it any longer. You promise to let me live in it. That's a granny flat arrangement for Services Australia's perspective. Some of the others, if I sell up and you sell up, mum and dad sell up and the kids sell up, and then we merge our funds to buy a new property together, but the property is now only in the kid's name, then that's a granny flat arrangement. That's something that Services Australia will recognise. But again, I can't have any legal entitlement to the property because it's got to be this idea that I give you the cash and you give me somewhere to live. If I've got a legal entitlement to it, then it can't be a granny flat arrangement because you can't keep me out. It's my place. I'm entitled to be there. But if I transfer and purchase a new property that's solely in the kid's name, my name isn't on the title deeds, then again, it's this idea of a granny flat arrangement.
Okay. I'm curious, do you have at your fingertips roughly how many people as a percentage of the welfare benefits out there, how many people may be in that kind of an arrangement?
No, I wouldn't be able to tell you how many it is. I can tell you that when I was the Financial Information Service Officer at Brookvale, I would be having that conversation a lot. It
Right.
was very common, again, with the very large property prices. And one of the ways that people might be considering using the property to help look after the kids is by doing granny flat arrangements through the property. But there's a lot to, although there are some immediate benefits from it, you've really got to, and this is not just a Services Australia issue, there's lots of potential hazards which come with the granny flat arrangements.
Right.
Because I don't have my name on the title deeds. I have no legal right to live in the property apart from this arrangement that I have with my kids or with whomever I'm doing it with. So it can have massive implications for estate planning. If I've got multiple kids and I make a granny flat arrangement where I transfer a large amount of cash, for example, to one and live with them, but I don't give any cash to the others, what does that mean for my will when I pass away? Or what happens?
I guess to use an old Paul Keating truism, the devil is in the detail.
Yeah. And what happens if we started this great arrangement and I'm now living in the back door with the kids, but then we end up feuding and not liking each other, or my son divorces and then...
Does that actually happen? Sorry, I'm being facetious.
I know.
Of course it happens.
Many conversations. And it's that idea of family, and then shove a whole bunch of money in there and all sorts of mayhem can happen. So there's a lot of protections and there's an awful lot of thought and conversation that you really need to make sure everybody understands. Lots of conversations we recommend you have before you even start going down the path of actually doing anything.
Right.
So that the kids that you're doing the granny flat arrangement with understand where they stand, and the kids that you're not doing the granny flat arrangement with understand as well. So that, so there's a lot to be thought about before you go down that sort of path.
I guess that probably answers the next question I had. Why does Services Australia assess these arrangements? I guess is to possibly prevent these maelstroms down the path. Because
no, actually not for that. No, that's a good side effect. But the reality is we want to make sure. So there's this thing called a reasonableness test. So and there are only certain circumstances where you do actually apply the reasonableness test. So there are three where you don't. So this is, I'm going to say them straight away. So there are three circumstances where it's immediately reasonable the amount of money that you spend to create a granny flat arrangement. First is you pay for the construction of a granny flat unit in the kid's house. So you pay for that self-contained unit. Now, if you want solid gold toilet seats, you pay for the solid gold toilet seats. That's perfectly fine. But you pay, and that's what you pay, but that's all you pay. You don't add any extra cash on top of that. You just pay for the construction.
Right.
Another one is, as we mentioned, if you sell or you transfer the title of your home completely to the kids or to a third party, and they allow you to live in your home for the rest of your life, that's also allowable. There's no upper limit on that. Or if you and the kids both sell up and then you purchase a property together, but in the kids' name only, so you combine funds, there's no upper limit on those as well. But if the kids already have a self-contained flat, for example, in their house, and then you decide to move into them and you transfer a large amount of cash for that to happen, or if you build the self-contained unit and then give cash on top of that, then we have this thing called the test of reasonableness. And the idea here is to work out that what you're giving in cash is reasonable to the benefit that you're going to receive from that. So it's unreasonable, for example, for a 95-year-old to give their daughter $2 million to live in their home for the rest of their life, because they're not going to get $2 million worth of value out of that one. Whereas if I'm 65 and I'm going to be living with them, then I'm potentially living for 30 years. There's a big cash component or a trade-off associated with doing that.
Okay.
So certainly when you're looking at things like a cash transfer to create a granny flat arrangement, the test of reasonableness can come in play.
Right.
Or if you're paying cash on top of, for example, building or constructing that granny flat unit. And if you're thinking of doing any of those, then absolutely you need to speak to our financial information service, because any amount that's over the test of reasonableness creates a gifting situation. You're giving more than you should, and then potentially you're creating a gift that can have an impact on your eligibility. So call us on 132300. In fact, I'm just going to say straight out, if you're ever thinking about a granny flat arrangement, then speak to the financial information service, whatever the plan is.
Yep. Stop and come and talk.
Yeah, don't come and see us after you've done it, because then it's done and there's not a lot we can do about that. But ring up 132300, say the words financial information service, and talk to us about what your thoughts are, and then we can help you understand what that might mean for you and your payments and the family.
I guess I'm curious, because you've actually sat in that role as a information services officer, how big a gap between people's understanding and the reality when you were dealing with real life situations? How big was that gap?
I think the biggest issue is actually the non-Centrelink issues. A lot of the scenarios people are coming up with are actually going to be perfectly fine with Services Australia and
Oh,
actually wouldn't
okay.
have much of an impact for the pension at all. But
Right.
they haven't thought about estate planning. They haven't thought about what it might mean if they had to go to an aged care facility within 5 years of going into a granny flat arrangement, or
Right.
an aged care facility into the future. There's not a lot of, not necessarily thinking the broader prospects of your cash in hand position now, but also the will, and also importantly, how do I make sure that my kids are still going to talk to each other after we do something like this when the whole thing is done? Because I've just given a whole stack of cash to one of them and I haven't
Yeah.
given a whole stack of cash to the other two. And how is that going to be fair when we look at the will and what the will's going to be? So it's a lot of the legal side of the issues rather than the Services Australia side of the issues that hasn't been necessarily thought through.
Yeah, I got to say, I've had a number of estate planners on the show over the years, given the show's been going 5.5 years now. We've had a number of people, and I mean, I've heard some curlies at
Yeah.
investment shows as well. And they just smile and go, the moment there's a house, especially in Sydney and Melbourne, and an estate or a will, watch the knives come out. They've said, siblings for life, enemies forever. It's like, wow. And the stories they've got, you could write, I think, 3 or 4 different Hollywood movies that would
Yep.
be entertaining, I think, is
No.
probably an interesting way, I guess.
Tragic would be another
Well,
really
I
good
mean, I recently, my mum's been gone 4 years now, but there was some interesting discussions around her will and estate, and thankfully it all got sorted out to the better and the best, and that's great. But you don't always hear those nice stories, I guess. Look, we're at halftime. This is a fascinating discussion. We've got a lot more to cover yet. You're here on Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money, and investing. I'm here with Justin Bott, the Media Information Officer from Services Australia. We are talking granny flats. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with you in just a moment. Hi, and thank you for listening to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly radio program about finance, money, and investing on Radio Northern Beaches and nationally on the Community Radio Network around Australia. The views, comments, and opinions aired during our program should not be construed or viewed as financial advice. Any commentary is general advice only and does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. You should consider whether the advice is suitable for you and your personal circumstances. If in doubt, you should contact an authorised licensed financial planner. We welcome questions and feedback, and you can get in touch with us via our blog, social media channels, or email. Please search for Dollars and Making Sense in your favourite podcast platform, or check out our blog at otgcapital.com.au/blog. Hi, and welcome back to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money, and investing. I'm your host, Ray Treverson. I'm here with Justin Bott, the Media Information Officer from Services Australia. And this week we are talking about granny flats. Now, before we went to the break, ladies and gentlemen, I guess we're having a bit of a chuckle that when an estate or a will is discussed and there's a piece of property involved, particularly in the capital cities, we're talking big bucks and there's potential. I mean, if there's ever, when you talk about kinetic energy, I think about dynamite, for example, the amount of stored energy sitting in gunpowder or whatever. That, I think, is the same thing when you're talking about siblings and a piece of real estate that's got to be divided. Now, we're talking about granny flats, Justin. So some of this dividing has actually occurred before the death. So you've lived this as an information officer yourself. What are the kind of steps that people have to take? You talked about reasonable, and then I can't get that word out, reasonableness test. I'll get that right sooner or later. What are the things that people need to do to prepare before they actually take the big step?
Yeah, so there are a couple of long-term things that you really need to think about with the granny flat. And obviously, letting us know when it's happening is important. But as I said, I really can't recommend enough speaking to these free and impartial financial information service, because there's no skin in the game for us. It's not about trying to give any advice that's going to be advantage of one or the other. It's just telling it how it is. So first step, speak to the financial information service. Second step, legal. Let's get the solicitors involved. In all this process, let's talk with the family. Now, granny flats work absolutely fine if I've got one child, because they were going to get it all anyway. What does it matter? The estate's very simple. The kids were going to get everything anyhow. When there's more than one child, though, there can be confusion. So having everybody sit down and talking through, again, this idea, I'm not handing over this asset to this one child for no benefit. Yeah, it's not like they're just getting the money for nothing. They've got to have me and look after me for potentially the rest of my life. Now, that could be 8, 10, 15 years. So there isn't that distinct trade-off.
Yeah. And blended families, or also, add another, throw another grenade over the fence line, I guess, when you've got blended families as well, I guess.
Yeah, because you're part of the issue is the security of the person that's creating the granny flat arrangement, because they don't have any asset, any home in their name, and they transferred the cash to create that to somebody else. So they're really, it's that legal agreement that you're potentially sitting down with a solicitor. You don't have to have one. There's no rule anywhere that says you have to have one. We just recommend you do have one about how this relationship is going to work and what happens if everything, for example, if it all falls apart. The other side of it is that if you have to leave a granny flat early, which is another thing people don't think about. So Services Australia will allow the lump sum for a granny flat. We don't look at it unless you leave early. Sorry, I should clarify. Under those circumstances where I said the reasonableness test doesn't apply, then we don't care about the value of the asset that you use to create that granny flat arrangement. Doesn't count, apart from we still pretend you're a homeowner for that amount. But if you leave early, then that can all change. And what we're looking at here is, was the leave or the reason that you left something that could be foreseen? Was it a foreseeable loss? So again, if I'm 92 years of age and very, very frail, then having to go into aged care within 5 years is quite a foreseeable event. But if I'm 68 and perfectly healthy, then having to go to aged care in the next 5 years, it could be completely unforeseeable. So one of the things that we recommend is getting a full medical checkup done. Just because if an event occurs, I can prove that there was no way we'd known that at the time that I entered the granny flat arrangement, I did not have that condition.
A pre-existing condition.
Yes, if there is a pre-existing condition, then there is a possibility that this was a foreseeable outcome, and leaving early. And so that means 5 years. After 5 years, it doesn't matter. But if you leave a granny flat within 5 years of creating a granny flat, then the lump sum that you put into it, can actually be treated as a gift for the remainder of the 5 year period of time. So if you go in for 3 years and then have to leave, if it was foreseeable, then you potentially created a 2 year gift, which would have a massive impact, potentially not only on your pension, but also potentially on aged care fees if that's where you need to go. So having a full medical thing done, do the full medical checkup, and just having that document sitting in the cupboard somewhere. It's just sitting there for 5 years. Hopefully you never need to look at it, but it's just there as a backup is something else that's really important to do. Also, from a financial planning perspective, selling, downsizing, releasing capital, what does that mean? What am I going to do? I've got the super options and everything else that's available for me as well.
They're interesting facts to deal and discuss. I'm curious, have you in your time and experience seen where there's relationship breakdown? What tends to happen then?
I have one. I actually won't say, because my customer base was the Northern Beaches. So I won't say. Let's just say that it doesn't necessarily go the way it planned, and good intentions don't necessarily work out. Also, you've really got, and this is actually the really significant part, you've got to think about the wording of the will and what's your thought about the lump sum for the will. Because if I transfer a lump sum to one child, and say I've got $1.5 million, I transfer 500,000 across to one child to create the granny flat arrangement. And then when I pass away, I say, well, one child's already got the 500,000, therefore I give the remaining 1 million to the other two kids. Seems fair and equitable. Except for the fact that that first child has got nothing, because they got the 500,000 because they had to look after me for 15 years.
So there's no expectation of the care component.
If I don't acknowledge the fact that this actual care is going to be a cost, I'm not creating a granny flat arrangement is not doing the person I'm creating it with any favors. They're going to be looking after me. They're going to actually having to take care of me in a way that the other kids won't.
Yeah.
And if I don't take that into account as part of the will distribution, then they've done all that work in effect for nothing, because the kids got the same amount of money and they didn't have to do anything for it because they're going to get through.
And I'll chime in right now and give a big vote of thanks to my own sister, who looked after my mum for many years as a carer. I often say to people, beware of the carer that ends up being the cared, because the burden on looking after a septuagenarian, octogenarian, or nonna, or whatever. Anyway, my mum was a nonagenarian. There you go, a new term. But I can't impress upon the listeners, that's a huge burden. It's enormous. And I know, when we had discussions, for example, around respite care, we'd get an occasional phone call. Mainly my wife was dealing with this, but, this element of guilt around putting somebody into respite care, and we're sort of going, go ahead and do it. Because, when they get to that age, and particularly if you throw dementia into the pot, they can be nasty pieces of work. And so I'd say to anybody that considers this granny flat arrangement, think long and hard, because the burden of caring is huge.
Now,
is huge.
And in that scenario, think about the other side. So we've now got $1 million when mum passes away, and we divide that 30, so 333,000 each. Right. The other two kids say, well, you've actually got 833,000 and we've only got 333,000. So how is that fair? So that's why the conversation has to happen. That's why we need to get everybody sitting around the table when we think about all of this. This is what is going on. This is actually the dynamics of what's happening. Lawyers and solicitors and wills are all well and good, but if everybody doesn't come with the same understanding at the very beginning, there is a real risk that the family could be damaged. The kids' relationships could be damaged afterwards by not understanding what's going on. So, although I have heard horror stories, I've also had great successes in granny flat arrangements, but I've heard horror stories as well. So it's the only way to solve it. It's not about legal. It's not about solicitors. It's about sitting down, talking it through. If you're going to have a phys appointment, bring the kids along. They're more than welcome to come and sit down with them as well.
That's
so they can understand everything
That's a good idea, isn't it?
Yeah. So bring everybody along to the story. Because I've had one and we talked through what a granny flat meant. And then mum and dad said, no, I'm not doing that. And they walked out and we'll never talked about it ever again. It's fully understanding everything that's the full implications of the decisions.
As is their right.
Yeah.
As is their right. I'm curious though, with let's say you've got somebody that has done this granny flat arrangement. They're now settled. It's a year in. They're all good. Are they entitled to the pension?
With us, the granny flat arrangement, we treat that as if, basically in most cases, we treat that as if it's the family home. The lump sum that you pay, as long as it's over what's called the extra allowable amount, the $260,000 or so. So the lump sum that you pay to create that granny flat arrangement, we treat as if that's the value of the family home. Right. And because it's over the 260,000, and in most cases it is, that is therefore the exempt asset, like the family home is the exempt asset.
Gotcha.
So from our perspective, we're then just looking at everything else that you paid. If you pay less than the 260,000 as the lump sum to create the granny flat arrangement, we will treat you as a non-homeowner. Right. We assess that lump sum as a non-income generating asset. And then again, we look at everything else that you got, but now we're using the non-homeowner assets threshold. So if I sell my place for $1 million, and then I, for whatever reason, or again, if I transfer the full title, that's the best way to do it. If I transferred the full title of my property to the kids to create the granny flat arrangement,
right,
then the house was an exempt asset because it was in my name. It's now an exempt asset because it's over $260,000 granny flat arrangement lump sum.
Right.
My circumstance from a pension perspective is exactly the same because I've still got the same income and assets afterwards. That granny flat arrangement transfer wouldn't make any difference. If I sold my place for 1.8 and then used $500,000 to build a self-contained unit on the kids' property, well, then I've got that 1.3 million left over. Then that's going to have a massive impact on the pension.
Okay,
because
so
I've got new assets.
Factors. So these are all factors then that need to be brought to the table and thoroughly discussed, because I know, I meet people at investment shows and the like, and even if they're on a settling payment, the idea of selling a property and all of a sudden having all that cash compromising their payment starts sending shockwaves. And I think it's the kind of discussion they've got to have early and often to fully understand where they are before and what happens after as well.
Yep.
So look, I just, this has been a really good show, ladies and gentlemen. I think it keeps highlighting the value of the FIS within Services Australia. I mean, we cover a lot of bases with that, but this granny flat arrangement, I think, is a wonderful thing, but it's not one size fits all. I think is the best way to put it.
Absolutely not. It is really,
it is not.
Individual circumstances.
Yeah. And like we always say, we never give personal advice, but in this instance, go and talk to people at the FIS first before you do anything, and then sit down with some lawyers and discuss it thoroughly. Justin Bott from Services Australia, real pleasure to have you on the show yet again. This is a great show. I think a lot of people should be listening to it because this information is invaluable. Stop, draw breath, and go and talk to some people who know what they're on about. I think it's just fabulous place to start, don't you reckon?
Absolutely.
Justin Bott from Services Australia, thank you for being on Dollars and Making Sense yet again. And until next time, adios.
Thanks so much for having me.